Hi everyone! Today we're going to do an experiment. A few videos ago, I made this coaster and I used some Play-Doh to create a barrier in my mold so I could do the resincrete part separately first. And it worked perfectly. So today, what I want to do is I'm going to test and see if the Play-Doh can do the same thing for epoxy resin. But before I get to that, I need to pour my first layer of resin. I have here around 7.5 ounces of resin and I'm using Let's Resin's epoxy resin. This first layer of resin is mostly going to be for the rims of my pieces, but since I've never tried using Play-Doh with resin before, I'm also going to use it to protect my molds in case there's any weird or unexpected reaction between the Play-Doh and the resin as it's curing. With Easter literally being right around the corner, I honestly can't believe it's in a few days. Does anyone else feel that 2025 is going by really fast? I know I am, but I thought I'd make these trays Easter themed, so I'm going to be working with pastel colors this time. I'm mixing up some of my resin with these gorgeous pastel glitters from Resin, and these glittery resins are going to be for the rims of my pieces. Now I'm just going to pour the resin in, alternating between the pink and the yellow to fill in the rims. I will be pouring more clear resin into these molds to cover the surface here in just a bit, but I want to do the glittered resins first in hopes that the glitter will sink into the rims, if that makes any sense. For once, I actually want the glitter to sink. I want the glitters to stay only in the rims. I think it's going to be interesting to see if the Play-Doh can be used to create a barrier in epoxy because Play-Doh isn't made of silicone. It's made of water, salt, and flour, and we all know that resin doesn't bond to silicone, but will it and how will it bond to the Play-Doh? I'm hoping it doesn't bond. There's also a few other things that I'm wondering about, like will the heat of the epoxy resin cook the Play-Doh? Will the Play-Doh dry out before the resin cures and then bond? Will the moisture in the Play-Doh affect the way the resin cures? There's so many questions, and I'm sure there's a video out there with all these answers, but there's nothing like doing an experiment yourself and getting the hands-on experience. What I'm really hoping comes out of this experiment, though, is having a way to be able to keep colored resin separate from each other in the same layer of resin. Silicone putty is an option, but it can be quite expensive and it's a one-time use thing. At least the ones I've used, you mix it and whatever shape you get is the shape it stays in forever. I'm assuming the Play-Doh will be a one-time use too, but at least it's really cheap. Now I'm going to let this resin cure up and I'll be back tomorrow. It's now the next day and this first layer of resin is cured now. A little bit of the glitter did end up floating to the top, but you know what? I actually like how it looks. So now comes the Play-Doh part, and I'm going to take some Play-Doh, knead it a bit, and roll it out into a snake log shape. I do have to make sure that the Play-Doh is thick enough that it sits level with the sides of the molds. Especially for this bigger tray, I did end up filling it more than I intended to, so I want to make sure that none of the resin spills out. If you were to try this yourself, you should also make sure that the Play-Doh is as smooth as possible because resin will take the shape of anything it touches, so the smoother the Play-Doh is, the easier it should be to take it off if this works. Let me know in the comments if you tried doing something with Play-Doh and resin, and what did you do? Another thing I have to keep in mind as I'm placing and shaping the Play-Doh is once I have the shape I'm happy with, I need to gently but firmly press it down to make sure I don't get any resin leakage, because if the resin leaks, then it will defeat the purpose of this whole process. Now I'm just going to quickly look over what I've done here off camera and I'll be back so I can get to the resin. Okay, so I'm back and I had a closer look at the Play-Doh and I ended up adding reinforcements at the ends of the Play-Doh pieces just to be safe. So now it's time to mix up my different colors of resin. I already have the pink and the yellow in the rims, so now I'm going to mix up blue, green, and purple. It's funny, I rarely make holiday-themed resin crafts except for Christmas. Christmas is my favorite holiday, so I love making Christmassy things, but it's feeling a little strange making an Easter project. Let me know if you like it when YouTube crafters make holiday-themed projects. Now that my resin is mixed up, comes the tricky part, pouring in the resin. We should be able to see pretty quick if I did do a good job at placing the Play-Doh in place, because if there's any area where there's a gap, the resin will leak. One thing I'm also hoping for is that I don't get any air bubbles along the edges where the dough and resin meet, because I can't really go in with my toothpick like normal and run it along the edges. The only thing I can really do with my toothpick, which I will, is gently push the resin into the corners and up to the edges. I really don't want to risk moving the Play-Doh out of place, but everything is looking good so far and I don't see any leaks. I will be keeping an eye on these for the next few hours, checking them every hour or so. I'll put in any footage if anything major happens, but now I'm going to cover these up and keep my fingers crossed that this works. Okay, everyone, it's time for the moment of truth and see if this has worked out. The purple did end up leaking a little. I actually spotted it a couple of hours after I poured the resin, but it was nothing major for me to film it, and I did end up putting a little more Play-Doh to keep the resin in place, but as far as I can see, there aren't any other leaks. The Play-Doh did dry out overnight and it feels hard, but it's coming off okay. It's actually dried out on the outside, but the area that was touching the resin is still somewhat soft, and annoyingly, that's what's staying behind. But at least it looks like this idea has worked out, even though there is a bit of cleanup I'll have to do. But thinking about it now though, I'm so glad that I poured that initial layer of resin, because I don't think this colored resin would handle being tugged at it like it is without coming away from the mold if I had poured it directly onto the mold. So if you were to do this yourself, definitely pour a clear layer of resin first so that the resin you pour into the Play-Doh area has something to bond with. I will have to go in with some kind of tool that can scrape the rest of this Play-Doh out because my fingers aren't cutting it. Maybe some of my clay tools will help. Okay, so I'm going to sit here for the next little while and scrape off this clay, but I'll do it off camera just because it's probably going to take me a while, so I'll be back. All right, so I've cleaned up these trays as best as I can. There is still a little bit of Play-Doh residue where the dough wasn't fully smooth, but a lot of why the sides look a bit rough like this is because the resin has actually cured matte, which is interesting. So now the next thing I'm going to do is mix up some white colored resin to fill the rest of these molds. I'm going to use Let's Resin's Ocean White pigment paste because I want this layer of resin to be opaque, and it's really going to help make the pastel colors stand out. This white resin layer is also going to help hide any of the noticeable leftover residue from the Play-Doh. Now, if you were to ask me, do you recommend using this method to separate different colored resins? I think I would say yes and no if I'm being honest. Yes, if you don't have anything else on hand that could do the job. Plus, Play-Doh is super cheap and you can have a good amount of goes at it, but no, because there was a bit of cleaning up, and if you want to keep the area and edges clear, it might look a bit rough. But it's been fun doing this experiment though, and it is a good tool to have in your back pocket in case you need it someday. Now I'm going to let this layer cure up and I'll be back when I can demold these pieces. It's demolding time! I already went ahead and I've taken these out of the molds just to save some time, and I think they've turned out great. The white layer of resin has really made these pastel colors pop and has done an amazing job at hiding any Play-Doh residue that was left behind. I will be adding some Easter themed stickers to these trays to finish them off in just a bit, But I'm just so happy that in the end, I did get the results I was hoping for from this experiment. You can see the leak from the purple, but I'm just gonna pretend it's not there. So now, to finish off these trays and bring everything together, I'm going to add some of these rub-on stickers that I recently bought, and then I'm going to put a final layer of resin for a top coat. If you missed my initial video trying this type of sticker, I'll link the video at the top in case you want to check it out, but these stickers are really good for resin. But the reason I'm putting these stickers on my pieces is because although these resin trays look great as they are, at least in my opinion, I feel like there's just too much white empty space. It's the one thing I wish I had done differently. I wish I had made the area for the colored resin bigger. I just miscalculated the size of the space, and I think in my brain, the space where the Play-Doh was taking up was also where the resin was going to reach, so yeah. I need to keep that in mind for next time if I ever do this kind of thing again. I am wondering how this would work with other types of resin like UV or polyurethane, but I'm mostly curious about UV since it gets so hot so quickly. If any resin is going to cook the Play-Doh, I think it would be UV resin. It could be fun to test that out too. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me test out Play-Doh with other resins. Going back to what I'm doing in this video, I'm just spreading my resin thin for my top coat. Like I've mentioned in other videos, when it comes to trays, it's best to keep the top coat as thin as possible so that you can still use your piece as a tray, and anything that you put in it won't just slide off. I know some resin trays have really short rims like my square piece here, but it can be done. Again, I'm going to cover these up and I'll be back once this resin is cured up. Just look at how adorable these pieces turned out. These are going to look so cute on my Easter table. I'm just so happy with how these turned out. I know these may not be everyone's cup of tea, but let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you learned something. If you did, then please smash the like button, and if you'd like to see more resin crafting videos I've done, then be sure to check out one of the ones that's popping on screen. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!